We come on air with some developing news, and Ukraine says a Russian attack has significantly damaged the radiation shelter over the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. These are the pictures which have been released, and they show what President Zelensky says was a drone striking the shelter. He says it caused a fire which has since been extinguished. Mr. Zelensky says radiation levels have not increased, but that they're constantly being monitored. Chernobyl was the site of the world's worst civil nuclear disaster. One of its 4 reactors exploded in 1986, killing around 30 people immediately and dozens more since. Thousands are feared to have been exposed to high levels of radiation. The shelter, known as a sarcophagus, contains the lingering radiation. Well, all of this comes as President Trump has opened a diplomatic chasm with his Western allies by discussing a peace deal directly with Russia's President Putin. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky warned world leaders against trusting the idea that President Putin wants peace. And North America correspondent Merlin Thomas has more.
We missed you. We missed you a lot.
President Trump continues his conversations with world leaders. His latest guest at the White House, the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. But just a day before meeting his Indian counterpart, it was Mr. Trump's phone call with Russian leader Vladimir Putin that was making headlines. Their talks about ending the war in Ukraine was still very much on reporters' minds at a press conference.
We had a very good conversation with President Putin yesterday, and we also had a very good conversation. I did in both cases, with President Zelensky. And I think we're going to be able to do something. I think we're going to be able to make a deal. And I hope so, because it's a horrible war.
The president yesterday insisted that the Russian leader wants peace. But Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says he's warned world leaders against trusting Putin's claims of readiness to end the war.
I know him very well. Yeah, I think he wants peace. I think he would tell me if he didn't.
But even Mr. Trump admits that it might not be all that simple, adding that it wasn't practical for Ukraine to join NATO and it was unlikely it could return to its pre-2014 borders. But President Zelensky has said his country couldn't accept any agreements made without them.
We have already had 3 conversations with President Trump, so I don't really accept this call, that it was a priority for him to talk to Russia first. It's not very pleasant in any case. You know how Ukrainian society, how all of us and Europeans react. It is first and foremost about Ukraine, and nothing can be done about Ukraine without Ukraine.
As Ukraine nears its 3rd year of conflict, those living with its consequences are eager for an end. Negotiations could start today, with Mr. Trump suggesting that Russian representatives will meet in Munich, which is hosting a security conference. Merlin Thomas, BBC News, Washington.
We can go live now to Kyiv and join our Ukraine correspondent, James Waterhouse. James, we'll get to the diplomacy in a moment, but I just wondered if you could bring us up to date on what more we know about that drone strike on Chernobyl.
Well, we could see a small hole in the sarcophagus shelter above the what were the reactors of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant after another night of bruising Russian drone strikes. Now, the damage seems to be on the outer metal casing. There is a thicker concrete one underneath that. So fortunately, it seems like radiation levels are what are described as normal. But this is an area that's become, well, before the full-scale invasion, it was a popular tourist spot. And there is still an exclusion zone in place around. It's around an hour north of where I am in Kyiv, and it reminds me of when the invading Russian forces moved south in 2022. They arrived at the power plant at Chernobyl and started digging trenches, disturbing a load of radioactive soil. So it's not the first time the site has been in the headlines in this full-scale war. But thankfully, it seems that the situation is under control. But this is a byproduct of almost nightly Russian drone and missile attacks.
Indeed, and you say, the latest there on the war that carries on, but of course there's a new agenda now to try and end Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We heard in that report there that Mr. Zelensky saying, well, nothing can be done about Ukraine without Ukraine. He is going to be meeting JD Vance, the US Vice-President, later today. But so far, James, would you say that there is a feeling that Ukraine's been a bit shut out of these ongoing plans that have been coming out from the White House?
It certainly looks like that, doesn't it? I mean, we had this extraordinary, these extraordinary statements this week on what Washington believes can come out of this war, in that Russia won't be going anywhere and that it won't be overseeing any long-term foreign troop presence inside Ukraine. I mean, while unsurprising, to hear America say that for Ukraine would have been a body blow. Then you have an apparent warm phone call between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin first, before Kiev, and that matters when you're thinking about optics and how you want to present yourself. And I think when you're seeing this, not quite a charm offensive, but this certainly it's a warming of language from Washington towards Russia, where Donald Trump is even talking about Russian sacrifice in the full-scale invasion it's waged against Ukraine. It's high-stakes stuff for President Zelensky at the Munich Security Conference. He's meeting with the US Vice-President JD Vance. Now we understand where he will be asserting his interests, but crucially so will Mr. Vance. He will be laying out his vision for American contributions on the global stage in the future. There were rumours, well, Donald Trump even suggested that there could be three-way talks between the US, Russia and Ukraine. President Zelensky's team has said, we're not expecting that. I don't think the organisers in Munich are either, but who knows? It's another Donald Trump curveball for Ukraine, and we'll wait to see what guarantees will come out of today and tomorrow when President Zelensky will give a speech. But at the moment, he's not starting with very much.
Indeed, and all the while the war continues on. James Waterhouse in Kyiv, thank you very much for bringing us up to date. Well, President Trump's Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth has arrived in Poland for talks on Ukraine. The new secretary delivered an uncompromising message to Ukraine in Brussels on Thursday, telling a meeting of Kyiv's allies that there'd be no return to Ukraine's original borders, and said that NATO membership was unrealistic. Well, let's speak to Will Vernon, who is in Warsaw for us. Just tell us about this visit and how it's being received in Poland.
Well, the US Secretary of Defense is right now holding talks with the Polish Defense Minister, not far from where I'm standing now. He'll also be talking a bit later to the Polish President. Now, officially on the agenda is bilateral cooperation and joint military projects. But of course, surely much of the discussion is going to be about Ukraine. Pete Hegseth comes here leaving a trail, really, of incendiary comments in his wake. In Brussels, Mr. Hegseth caused controversy when he said that it's unrealistic for Ukraine to return to its internationally recognized 1991 borders. He cast doubt on NATO's Article 5 of collective defense, and he downplayed the prospects for Ukraine joining NATO. Now, those comments were met with a kind of cacophony of criticism, really, both of those comments and of Donald Trump's proposal to hold direct talks with Vladimir Putin. Now, Mr. Hegseth yesterday in Brussels rejected those accusations that he and his boss had essentially made concessions, had given Vladimir Putin what he wanted before the peace talks even began. And Mr. Hegseth, when he rejected those accusations yesterday, said that Donald Trump wouldn't allow anyone to turn Uncle Sam into Uncle Sucker.
OK, Will Vernon in Warsaw, thank you very much for bringing us up to date on that meeting there. US Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth, of course, in Poland.